Hey class, welcome to another Sunday morning on the couch with Mr. Dow video chat about the two stories assigned this week. These stories were assigned specifically to illustrate the ideas of theme, and I recommend that you read the essay on theme that's part of our module this week, maybe even before you listen to this chat. So the two stories are Once Upon a Time by Nadine Gordimer and The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. The first thing I would say is that, a lot of the stories we've read, most that we've read, well, they all have themes, but most of them are focused on character and character psychology and plot, etc. So the theme isn't something that naturally necessarily comes right out at you. And it's there, but you have to think about it. You have to think about how the different elements connect and reveal some sort of meaning. When I'm reading those stories, I'm really more focused on the character, the main character, and what's happening to him, and how the situation will resolve itself. The two stories this week, though, are a little different because both Gordimer and Jackson have written stories that don't really use a protagonist in the traditional sense, and I can tell from the way the stories unfold that they're not particularly interested in the people of the stories. They really are more interested in this point they're trying to make, and they've written a story to illustrate a point. And so when I finish the story, I naturally tend to think more about the issues of the story as opposed to thinking about what happened in the characters. So first, I would point out both stories do still have plots that have a normal structure where there's a situation or conflict set up that has some kind of tension in it, and the tension builds to a climactic point, and that climactic point is very close to the end of the story. However, I think both stories are a little different than our normal stories in that the characters are pretty shallow. In The Lottery, you have characters that are they seem like normal people, but I don't know what anyone's thinking or feeling. And my protagonist, Tessie Hutchinson, I guess she's the protagonist. She doesn't really separate herself from the town in any specific way, and the author does a few things in the story to to get me to not like her. I don't like Tessie Hutchinson. I think she's a terrible human being. So in the end, I don't really feel that it's her story because she hasn't really been brought out enough, and my sympathy for her has also been taken away. It's kind of the story about this town. In Once Upon a Time, I would say the characters are even more shallow. They're more flat. They're not even characters really. Since the story is told so much as a fairy tale, what you have are just sort of very, very basic types: a mom, a dad, a kid, etc. We don't know what they think or feel. They're just they're basically just sort of stand-ins for generic types, as opposed to actually being literary characters. And that's another sign that Gordimer is trying to make a point more than she's trying to involve me in the psychology of humanity. Okay, then let's talk about what it is that gets us to those actual themes, though. I think of all the things I write in that essay, the thing I want to focus on today, talking to you, is probably more how in a story, in any story, but especially one that's so theme-based as these two, every single small detail is there to help get me to the point the author's trying to make. Let's start with The Lottery. I would say the Lottery, small details, they can be almost hidden, but they're there. In the very first paragraph of the story, she includes a detail of the children gathering stones and piling them up in the corner of the field, and that's a really weird detail. It doesn't stick out much under a description of this normal, beautiful June day in this little village. But later, I go back and realize, oh, I get that. That's why that detail's in there. She's letting me know in the very first paragraph what's going to happen. But more tied into the actual meaning of the story, I think you've got the details of the fact that the young Hutchinson boy, I think it's Davy Hutchinson, they give him a stone to throw at his mother, and it seems like he is going to do that. He's going to throw it at his mother. An even better detail is the one of Mr. Adams. He's the one person who brings up a potential objection to doing the lottery because he talks about how the other towns are thinking of giving it up or even have given up the lottery. And then, of course, he's argued down by Old Man Warner. But as a reader, I'm kind of thinking, okay, Mr. Adams, he's a future thinker. He's sort of progressive. But at the very end of the story is a little detail that when the villagers descend upon Tessie Hutchinson to stone her to death, Mr. Adams is right up front. In other words, he brought up the whole thing just to discuss this idea of hanging on the tradition or not. He is fully invested in the lottery tradition and is going to follow it. So I put all the details together at the end, including the way that she writes about these people and the stuff they talk about. At the end, I think the theme there's obviously a theme about tradition and following traditions without understanding them. But with those details kind of lead me to an even stronger theme about where our sense of morality comes from. In this case, she's very strongly implying in the story that morality is subjected to whatever society you're living in. Now, no, in other words, if you grew up in a society that practices cannibalism, you too would be a cannibal. That's what she's kind of saying in this story. It's hard to get away from it since every single detail is making that point. And you might like to say, oh, no, not me, Mr. Dow. I wouldn't be a cannibal. But her story is kind of, because she hasn't written about weird, psychologically warped people. She's written about normal people, or they seem normal to me, and I can identify them as normal, and even nice people as I go through the story. It's only at the end that I get kind of like, I get kind of freaked out by these people and think, oh, they're terrible. But she's done so much to make them everyday, mundane, normal people like you and me that I think the point comes across then that, well, wait a minute, is she saying that you and I would also throw stones at our mother if we grew up in a village where that was normal? And that's something to think about. And that gets me back to the theme point, which in a story like The Lottery is kind of really her main concern, not so much the character. In Nadine Gordimer's story, I think we tend to, if we're hearing a fairy tale or one of those Aesop's fables, they are told, this story is told like that. And we constantly, we naturally are leaning to think, okay, what's the message here? What's the moral of the story? Since she tells it like a fairy tale, it's kind of like leaning to that, a moral of the story. And it's pretty, if we just look at the fairy tale part, it's pretty easy to say, okay, the moral is too much security and paranoia doesn't really protect you, it hurts you. That's good, and that's a perfectly good theme, but Gordimer is a better writer than that. She can go as a level deeper. The detail I would point out that is part of the theme is the first page or and a half, which are kind of the frame device, where she's writing about herself and why she wrote this story at all. And the details in there add another layer to this idea of overprotectiveness, because the details in that frame device are all about how they bring up these elements of the fact she lives in South Africa, where there was a slave economy, and in South Africa at the time she wrote, there was a system of apartheid. So you have a really strong division, not based on economics, which is what the story's characters are dealing with, but based on race. That's part of it. And if I go through the rest of the story, I see, well, yeah, there is a racial element all the way through here. So I think because of that frame device, there's another thematic element here where we have to think about how does the way we separate ourselves through races, how does that poison our lives, even if we've made our lives as happy and secure as possible? Are they ever happy and secure if that security is based on racial division? So in the end, both stories lend themselves more to theme interpretation, probably at least more easy theme interpretation than the other stories we've had in the class so far. But every story's got a theme. Every story's got something the author's trying to get across, or if they weren't trying to get something across, they still are implying things because an author's values are always going to be in there. We're lucky here with stories like this where the author's values are really at the heart of what they wanted to write about. Okay, that's all I want to say about theme for this time. Make sure you read that essay. All right, later.